how's it going, everybody? Welcome to Gaming Over 30. My name is Dushan Williams. This is my co host, Christopher Moncada. And Chris, got a question for you.
What's that question?
Um, Last time we talked about sandbox games. Do you enjoy them personally, or is sandbox games something that you actually like?
Give me an example of what you would call a sandbox game. That way I could get my headspace in the right spot.
Yeah, I think the like games like Marvel Spider-Man for the PlayStation. I think that's probably one of the better examples. We also have Assassin's Creed Syndicate. We have what GTA maybe. I think that one, since it always happens in one city. I think those are pretty good examples of just sandbox games that I know a lot of people at least touch and play.
Kind of like Sunset Overdrive as well and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Sunset Overdrive kind of falls on that because, like I say, it just takes place in one place and it's all about exploring that place.
Yeah, I think I'm a mediocre fan of them. Like it's never been a thing where I'm super into them and like I get excited when they come out and stuff like that. It's never been like, oh, that's the game I want. That's what I want to play and stuff like that. Like sandbox games have to really have a nice um, play, like a nice what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it. Uh, where you where the play like what you play in the mechanics where it has a nice mechanics that kind of makes you want to go back and keep doing the things and stuff like that. Because a lot of sandboxes can start to become a little too collectible-ish, and when it starts getting to that point, that's when it starts really getting like boring for me. And it's like, all right, I really don't need to collect all this stuff. I really don't need to collect all that stuff and things like that.
So like sandbox games are nice, but when the fatigue starts sitting in, it sets in pretty hard.
Yeah,
I'm
and I don't
kind of
know if
like
that's like I don't know if that might be like an ADHD or something like that. Where I just like, all right, brain off, move on to something else.
yeah, no, see, I tend to agree, right? Like there are sandbox games that there's so much unique stuff to do that you kind of forget that you need to like do some other stuff, and really good for side quests, really good for like just trying to do different things, especially if it's a game that has a lot of mechanics for you to kind of like layer on top of each other. But then there's also the ones where, we talked a lot about on the podcast, like laundry lists, grocery lists, where it's like, hey, you're at a new area, you have to do these five things.
Yeah,
Go save three old women, go collect all these collectibles because they're spread around the whole thing, and maybe go do some other stuff and then get 100%. Like those are, I think, the type that I think after a while kind of kill the genre for some games. Like the framework is there, but sometimes people rely on the framework to make like a good game, and sometimes it just doesn't work that way.
yeah, I could see that, definitely see that. I think sandbox games are kind of just they're starting to evolve and change a little bit to add more, I guess, RPG elements to it in a sense and stuff like that. And you're starting to really see like a really big merging of these two genres kind of together and create these newer games that are starting to come out and stuff like that. And so it's really interesting to see how like you involve using the sandbox of this big area, going to it and just going to verse it and then adding the RPG elements to it, and that's like the thing that he's like, oh, now you have all these skills that you can add, change, and update and stuff like that, and that's where I can get overwhelmed at that point, where it starts becoming a little too much for me because like, all right, now I gotta collect these things, but now I want to do these skills, but is this the right skill I want to do? And then you always have that option sometimes where they don't give you the choice to reset your skill tree, and then you're kind of stuck with what you have, and you're like, oh, this build I did not work out.
Gotcha. So I think we have a pretty good opinion on sandbox games. I mean, we played a few. Obviously, you played some. Some of my favorite games kind of revolve around the genre, especially games like Arkham Knight and all that, where it's like you really have a lot of stuff to do. But I think after you play a while, you kind of see some issues with it. And so I thought, we talked about it last time with some of the genres and stuff. The last episode, we hit sandbox, and that time, I think it kind of actually warrants its own conversation to kind of really jump down into it because they're still going to come out. We're still waiting for GTA 6, we're still waiting for like other open map games to come out. And I wouldn't really count Harry Potter or Hogwarts Legacy as one, but it does have those kind of elements where it's like you pretty much need to kind of do some stuff, but it's really side quest um, directive, and not like, oh, did you do everything in the city? I thought today's topic video will be, are sandbox games the problem with single player? The reason why I kind of said it that way is because I think for single player games, this almost ends up being the default in some of them. Like you have really like two ways of doing it. Either you have a sandbox, stay in one place, do all the things, or you have a very linear game that says go this, don't go left, don't go right, you go straight, and we'll let the game take you where you need to go, kind of stuff. This is pretty much like the two ways that normally single player games go. And I think while the second way is something that's really restrictive, a lot of big narratives and kind of directional games, even games like Hi-Fi Rush recently, end up presenting a lot of good stuff with like mechanics, how you play games, how you experience them in the way because it's like you are pretty much hitting everything beat by beat. Versus in a sandbox game, like you have to wait for the game to kind of allow you to really explore, do whatever you want, and sometimes other things need to happen for you to really enjoy kind of being that open world and stuff. And I was just thinking about it, like what are just some issues that Sandbox has that is kind of making now the other side kind of people kind of enjoy like the linear style a little bit more.
That's a good question. I think what could really becomes an issue with sandbox games is they're I think like they're really hard to develop and they kind of cost a lot of money to do when it comes to this aspect because you're creating this giant world that has all this stuff going on in it that you have to do in it, and then on top of that you add all the mechanics of the game into the world. And once that happens, like that's where like I think sandbox game became kind of a problem because everybody wanted to do what GTA was doing in a sense because GTA was selling like bonkers and stuff like that, and so everybody had to find out how do I create that GTA like game, open sandbox game, and just make it bigger and better and wider and more extensive and stuff like that. And you get a lot of kind of small copycats of it, and then you also get games that take parts of it from it and maybe don't do too well in those aspects. And when I see that happen, like I kind of get fatigued when it comes to the games of those, and I just kind of go, well, I'm personally probably not going to play those too much because I'm going to drop off of them at some point. And so, is it really worth me to spend my money on this game that I know I will play for a little bit and then just completely drop off from it because I get bored of it or I just like don't like doing that mundane routine that goes on over and over in it.
So I like I'm gonna tend to agree, even though I can't like I want to disagree, but I'm kind of like that too. Like there's just sometimes at a certain point in a game where it could be too much, And for me, I haven't really been like the biggest like GTA fan, like when it comes to kind of that type of game, because I feel those type of games, the reason why it's hard for me to really play them is because I'm used to having like the main character like kind of move around a lot faster. Like I'm not
Yeah.
really used to like restricted to like kind of like the realism human aspect of like I gotta get a car, I gotta do this, like I want to do like some crazy stuff a lot of times. So those games I have a little bit hard time kind of really like vibing, especially like Watch Dogs, where Watch Dogs is really similar in that same kind of gameplay, but it's like well you have like different things that you can do, so it's not the same a lot of times like for other games that really don't have that kind of slow gameplay but they also have kind of like all that other stuff like oh I gotta still do this, I gotta still do that, it can be really daunting. I think right now in Hogwarts Legacy, like I'm wondering about myself of how far I really am in the game because I've done so much extra stuff. I'm like 50% of like all quests that are available, and I'm like I got this game like weeks ago. Either I'm not playing it enough or there's more in this game that I really deal with. And I'm already in my mind stopped doing like the smaller, like do this challenge to get this kind of perk kind of stuff. Like if it's not a spell, like I just like, no, I just don't really care. And there's only 26 spells. And a lot of those spells you pretty much get while you're playing the game. Just, hey, go to class, you get to learn this, or hey, we're going to teach you this. You have to do 3 things anyway. Go do it, get a spell. And that to me, that's a really big reward kind of that aspect. But like if you want to increase like your inventory, you have to do like these Merlin trials. and you're just kind of like, so I just got to run around all over this map, try to find these trials. First, I got to have the leaf to start the trial, and then I got to start the trial. Then I got to use one of the spells to do it, and it's like it doesn't take a long time, but I really don't want to sit there for like 2 hours hitting them all when I
Yeah.
could be like literally doing more side quests. Like I'd rather do the side quests and meet like the random people that somehow exist in this world. You know, that to me that's more interesting.
Yeah. Like kind of think about it. I think what really kills it for me for sandbox games is the mobility aspect of it. Like I really really enjoyed Sunset Overdrive just because of how fast paced it was, how it kept me wanting to like keep playing the game because as I did combos within like on the wires and jumping on things and jumping on cars with your dumb insane abilities that you had in that game, that's what made it really fun for me because like it kept me uh, into it to keep doing things like, oh, I can go faster, I can upgrade my point system that's in there that doesn't really mean much, but I can still do it and get better
Mhm.
grades and stuff like that. And when it comes to like I had issues with Spider-Man because like I really really enjoyed the gameplay, but it would just kind of get slow at some points because it's like, all right, now you gotta fight these bad guys. It's like, well, I already kind of did that like 2 hours ago. It was just a different set of bad guys, but you're doing pretty much the same thing again. And I'm doing this to get experience or a little extra points or to open up this part of the world or to get this collectible. And when that happens, I look at it and I go, okay, I see it. I see it, but like my brain wants me to mainline through it and just do all the main quests to get through the game. But then I get that thought of like, well, if I don't do these side quests here or go and do that thing here, maybe I'm gonna miss something that's really cool or really important to the game overall and stuff like that. And that's where I kind of start getting thrown off for them, and I go, I kind of just put them down and like, all right, well, I'm not going back to that game, or I forget even to just go back to that game.
Yeah, and I think I did that because I really like Spider-Man. I think Spider-Man was really good, and I think they did a really good job of the mobility in that game because
Yeah,
I'm not sure how a lot of them were before, but it was really hard for like some like the Spider-Man swinging and stuff. And I think one of the biggest praises was the fact that how easy it was to kind of move around, kind of swing around, and even some cases where you could really like speed through New York City. I think there were some real good points when it came to that part. But I do think like you are correct when it comes to like having to do like different things. And I think what it really comes, I think one of the things that is a really big hit for them that I kind of notice is enemy variation. I think one of the things that I've kind of noticed is when you play certain sandbox games, they can only have so many different type of enemies, or at least they choose to only have so many. Like there is never like in this area there's a different type of enemy than this area. It's normally like,
right.
oh, everybody's a thug, and all thugs are either big thug, little thug, thug with gun, thug with bigger gun. It's like, and then like the harder ones are like, ooh, I'm a thug but with a shield. And it's like, oh well, now I have to use this particular thing to get it out. And that part I'm fine. It's just like it's just more of like it's forcing me to use a mechanic rather than like forcing me to figure out what's the best way to tackle them. Because it's like
Yeah,
when I hear people are like, "Oh yeah, but you have to find like the right move to do this," it's like a lot of times it's like it's just rock paper scissors. Like, hey, I have
hmm,
shield, use shield breaking move. I have gun that you can't interrupt. Well, just move out of the way. Like it's like there's not much you have to really do. It's just always like you just have to pick the right move for it. Versus like, oh, I'm always surrounded by different enemies of different types. There are just some moves that help push people away or stuff like that. Like a lot of people like that kind of gameplay kind of I feel like falls short a lot because I don't think they really kind of put you in it. They'll put you a lot of enemies, but nothing where like, oh, what's the best way to tackle like multiple enemies and stuff like that. And so I think that's where like it becomes a problem because I think like a lot of games that I can remember where it was kind of daunting is like when you're going into an area and there's like 60 of these guys you have to fight and they put them in waves and but like Spider-Man was like this too, like for like the DLC a lot of the areas that you had to do were like you need to fight like 6 waves of people with shockers, guns, and if you run out of like like your other abilities and stuff, you're pretty much dead on the water because you can't just or like JoJo people in the face, right?
yeah,
Like it's not, it doesn't work that way when someone's like, "Yeah, I'm like 3 times bigger than you. Stop it." it's like that kind of stuff, right? And I guess it's just kind of funny because it's like, oh yeah, it's like you would think like that was a problem anymore. Like a lot of times, like you normally fight through enemies a lot quicker, but for games like this, you kind of really pay attention to enemy variety. And is when you see it so much, then it starts becoming fatiguing in that aspect.
Yeah, like you talking about how it's like, oh, this is a thug and that's a thug. It kind of started me thinking, me. It reminds me of like the old beat 'em up games or just kind of games in general in like the late '80s, early '90s. It was
Mhm.
always like the bandit or the punk rock dude and stuff like that that were like your thugs,
Yeah.
and it was just different variations per game to game of that. And now you're kind of getting that in the sandbox games now, but it's just like a quote unquote modern day thug, I guess you could say, and it's like
Yeah.
you just kind of cookie cutter paste and then add a little extra spice here and there for what game you're playing and how it goes. And maybe that's what really what it does is like, all right, like this gets kind of boring to me in a sense because like uh, Destiny's another one of those games where it's kind of an open sandbox, but it has like its own limitations. But the biggest complaint that would always come out of it is like their creation for enemies. When they do create new enemies, is awesome. Like the designs of them are great, but a lot of the times they'll come out with like some form of DLC or some kind of update to the game, and it's technically this it's a Vex enemy, which is kind of like the robotic ones, but they just added this little thing to it, and it's like, well, cool, but it's kind of the same enemy and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And so
Mhm.
like a lot of people would complain. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I know how to beat these guys. They just added this element, but all right, all right. Well, I just kind of flew through that because it was too easy. I knew how to beat them. So
Yeah. Have you noticed a lot of the variety ends up being almost less than RPGs? Because
yeah,
some RPGs, they're literally copy and paste from one stage to another. It's like, I got a fire element blob, ice element blob. Yeah, beat that. I just raised the difficulty on you. Like, just like that's pretty much how RPGs are. But it's like, actually, it's kind of the same in all these other aspects. It's just, and then I think it's something I noticed like in games like that where they have like a lot of like bandits and thugs. There's always like a level where they all have a pub that they go to, and sometimes for
yeah,
some reason you had to go to the pub because you had to go find somebody or whatever. And I just remembered in Spider-Man, it was like you had your little spider robot that had to go through the pub, and then everybody's all like, "Yeah, man, this thieving stuff is cool, isn't it? Yeah, it's great. This is the best thing ever." Wish Spider-Man wasn't around though. That kind of ruins the whole thing. Yeah, man, that ruins the whole thing. I could be stealing more stuff if it wasn't around. I know. It's like it's always like some like comical pub or something
yeah.
that like you have to go, and it's like they share that too, and it's like, huh? It's like it just even some of the aspects from game to game seem like very similar when they kind of play on this. And let's, let's see when it comes to enemies, it is nice though, but I think the bosses, I think sometimes kind of falter. Like in Spider-Man, the
Yeah.
bosses are pretty great because they're all mostly like the actual super villains. So they all have like their quirks. They all have the things that you're raring to go. But when it's like games that really don't have like those iconic characters and stuff, they're kind of either they're kind of similar to you in some aspect, or they're just like a bigger version of the big thug. It's like, oh yeah, now we got
Yeah.
Honcho Thug. Honcho Thug's here to really kind of slap some game on you, while all the other thugs, just crowd at you and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, I guess it's good for the first like 15 hours, give or take, how you play it. But when you start hitting 20 to 30 in that hour mark, then it's like, okay, like there has to be a way to go faster. Like there has to be a way I can
Yeah.
just one punch everything to make it easier.
I think that's why like I always kind of go back to Sunset Overdrive because they had a good like enemy development system because you had like your enemies with the orange glob on top of them and stuff like that that were there, and then you also had like your thug like enemies at the same time as well. So you had a kind of good mixture of getting involved with either or and having to change up the way you would fight them. And so when you go into it, it was like a regular thug. It's like, okay, this is kind of easy for me. I could just jump on top, slide on this, go in, mess these guys up, done. And then all of a sudden you get one of the big orange guys to pop in. You're like, oh shoot, I have to completely change my strategy now because this dude is
Mhm.
tougher, and I still have to deal with the regular thugs that I still didn't kill in the back. So it's like, all right, do this, jump this, do this, take care of this guy. Like that's where like it was really really fun for me because it was kind of like, all right, this is a nice change up because even though I understand why they use a lot of the same kind of enemies stuff like that in game stuff like that, this was a nice little flavor to add on top to be like, all right, now I get the difference. And to your point about the bosses, for me, it's usually not like the main bosses. It's the mini bosses and stuff like that.
I
Those
love
are the
it.
ones that are usually like that's the honcho thug. It's like, all right, cool. He's just like, he's kind of a bullet shield or whatever. So I gotta punch him 10 more times instead of the usual 2 times, and
You know
then
what's
things like that.
worse with those bosses is that they're sub bosses when you first fight them, and then
Oh
they're a regular
yeah,
enemy like just a little bit after that. Now you're fighting three of them. It's like okay, like this guy was like a big thing, and next you know you're just like okay, well, yeah, you're throwing them now because the game allowed you, right? It's like
yeah.
I was like okay, it's like that. You know, we're just gonna throw that whole concept out of the door. It's like, oh yeah, they were hard before, and now it's like, okay, well now you just like punch down the difficulty again, you know, and just
Yeah.
now you're punching like sub bosses, like they're like the regular, you know, henchmen and stuff. Those are kind of funny, you know, I'll admit, but it's like at the same time, it's like, now it just seems like it's starting to become lazy. Like, you know, hey, we paid a lot to make this asset, we are going to abuse it until you know it literally makes money itself. Like, you're going to see this guy. It took a while to make this guy, you know,
Or
and
it's
then
like it's like, all right, you see him, and it's later on like developers like, all right, we're doing this side mission again, blah blah. What should we add? Why don't we just take that guy that we had over there in the beginning and put him right here? All right, let's do
mhm,
it. Well, we'll put 3 of them. It's like, all right, cool.
like, but you have to make them blue because you know we already
Yeah.
use red too much. He has to match the walls in the background, you know. And you know, it's like speaking about like Sunset Overdrive. Like I think the one thing that made Sunset Overdrive just a little bit better is just how they kind of layer some enemies because you could get surrounded in that game pretty quickly, you know,
Yeah.
and you have to be movable. You have to be jumping on things, and everything else about I think, but what really helped the game that I feel like a lot of games I think probably fail the most at if they are not careful with it is weapons and abilities. I think that's the next thing when it comes to that. Like
Yeah.
games like this have to have a good amount of abilities, something that, you know, very traversal, very like clear stuff. Like you have to be able to have a swift army knife to kind of deal with like all things that the game can do. And I think like even in that game, I think there were some guns and stuff that you were just like, I will never use this.
Yeah.
They just like there's no I mean Teddy bomb maybe I might throw that around and stuff, but sometimes you'll forget you have Teddy in the back pocket. You could have just like no, I just fought like 20 guys. I could have literally threw like 3 bombs. It's like
Yeah.
they
I
probably
mean,
would
like
have been
would have been
done
a
with
quick,
it.
easy done thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because like we talk about these two games and it's they're both made by the same developer, and you could see where Spider-Man kind of got like it, especially for the movement stuff like that from Sunset Overdrive to make their game and just make it into a Spidey world. And with the Spider-Man game, you see how your abilities they do a really good job at the same time where like your abilities and the things you can upgrade or get new skills actually play and make a difference to the game. And that's where you see a lot of sandbox games that they kind of sometimes put ability stuff like that without actually making it a point to show like, hey, like you're getting this new ability and this is how much more it's going to change the game or your option to play that game instead of just being kind of like one of the Sunset Overdrive games over Sunset Overdrive guns where it's just kind of one of those simple guns. It's like, all right, we had this extra gun, but a lot of people don't really use it because it was just kind of thrown in there. And I think that's where these sandbox games is where they were trying to make them bigger, bigger, and bigger. It's like you don't have, you can make the sandbox really fun and big, but you don't got to make all the other stuff just add it in there to just kind of make it like a fluff thing. You know what I mean, it's kind of like filler stuff that you
Mhm.
fill into the game that gives the player options to go after it. But then they go, well, I really never used that ability because it didn't really do much difference. Like you know what I mean. And so I think that's where, when it comes to making these games, they can use their assets more wisely to focus on the skills and abilities or like weapons stuff like that to put in a game, and just make sure that it does a feel a different and it's actually worth it in the long run. So that way people have the option and want to use those things instead of just kind of be like, all right, yeah, cool, I have it, but I I got it on like kind of the third levelish part of the game, like
Mhm.
like 2 hours, 3 hours into it, and now I'm towards the end on the final boss, and I never touched that ability again or that weapon again.
True. You know what ability cheat that I like that is so I think it's a more of a guilty pleasure when it comes to sandboxes or just games like this. like, and I like for all of them is when you actually get abilities of the enemies that you fight. Like you'll get like a
Yeah.
sub part of the ability, you'll get something like that. And I always thought that was a great way of unlocking abilities kind of going forward because like you said, like, if you look at a big tree of all the different abilities that you can have and stuff like that, then you kind of look at it like, well, I mean, yeah, like the grind is already hitting you like first hour. You're like, oh, like there's a lot of stuff I gotta do. I gotta be doing all this, and then that leads to like all the side quests and all the side little things I just talked about, like Merlin trials and stuff. But it's always nice when you're like, oh, I beat this boss, and I got a full set of like new abilities that I can kind of abuse and stuff. And you know what? This is probably one of the times I'll say Forspoken did something good was that this was pretty much like their gameplay mechanic. Like when it comes to
Okay.
like actually fighting, was that all like the four big badasses that you have to fight, pretty much you gain their abilities. You have like your original magic, and then like the three that you actually have to fight, you actually had like a version of their abilities that kind of worked for you. And a lot of them were mainly attackful. So like a lot of them weren't like, oh, I have to use it for like special ability to do this and that. So like they may have like one each. Like the water one, you can ski through water. The fire one, you're like literally grapple hooking all over the place. And then like the earth one is like, just run. Just like run on the ground. Like just get those feet in there. But everything else was a nice attack that you can use. Like you could try to switch out. Like if you're really quick with it, I think probably keyboard, you probably could have even been even quicker with it, just kind of
True.
switching in between the different classes. But that was one of the things where I felt like the game actually did well, and only it saves it from being like from that 1 to 4 range that we talked about. Like this kind of like helped it be that 5 to 6. Was that the gameplay was great? It's just everything else about it really felt the game. And so that was one of the things where it's like, I really like that because you didn't know how your character can grow. And if you're not looking like all the publicity and all the other stuff that was happening with it, you wouldn't know that, oh, I'm going to get more magic from all these people. And then I have a whole nother tree and like, oh, maybe I need to do all that stuff. I do like those kind of surprises a little bit more. Um,
It's it's kind of like the Mega Man effect. You know what I mean? You
yeah.
kill the boss stuff for that. You get their weapon stuff for that, and then you end up finding out that that weapon you use actually works really well for this stage or that boss and stuff like that. Further on and stuff like that. I think that's a really cool mechanic and stuff like that that developers can kind of go more into and use because it kind of helps you out. I would think I can't say for myself and everything, but I would think it would help out to be like, all right, we're gonna create this boss and it's gonna have this, and then you gain that ability, and you can use those assets for that ability on you, and it makes more of an impact in the gameplay overall when you're playing.
Yeah, and you know what? The Mega Man effect is probably like the best way to say it because that's pretty much where all that started. And I just think like in a lot of different games, it's really just helped out. Like it's almost as great as like you getting like a new character in an RPG, right? It's
Yeah.
like, oh, like this character that was literally like giving you all this trouble through like the first half of the game, and they're like, you know what? Your side's better. I'm gonna join your side, and you're like, heck yeah, you get this one. Of course, they're not as strong as they are, but it's like still nice when you're like the girl who can control time magic now is like, oh, now I can control time magic. That's the boss. But it's just better in sandboxes because you're like, no, I can control time magic for real. Heck yeah, this is cool. It's funny, because it's like, oh yeah, there's still powers. But like I've always enjoyed it for a game the core main mechanic of gameplay is so important to it. The story is too, like as far as like tying all this stuff together, but actually having fun jumping into combat, which you're going to do a lot in, going from place to place, which you have to do a lot of, and then sometimes like other stuff, it's like they're just so important. Like you just have to have that and you have to nail it for your game to at least survive a little bit. Now, there's one thing that these games cannot like miss out, and that's fast travel. Like fast travel in itself, like you have to have it. It's one of those things where it's
Yeah.
like I'm not sure if they. I know before a lot of games did fast travel pretty terribly, and some new games still do it where it's like there's a caveat to it. So like, and I'll just say I like Hogwarts Legacy because it's the latest one that I played. But it's like, oh, if I want to go to a town, I have to make sure I went to the very particular little thing or like statue or whatever. or else I can't fly to
Yeah.
the town. And for you to get around, they use this mechanic to get around the different areas by putting these statues all over the place. But it sucks, like, when other games are like, "Oh, did you go to the city? Cool, now you can just visit it again." Like, you don't have to, like, go to the city and then go find the one thing. And I see, like, why Hogwarts Legacy did it, because there's a lot of open area and a lot of the towns are just, like, really small. So it's like, yeah, I can see this mechanic playing out, but there are a lot of games that I've played that you can't, like, just bounce between different areas really easily, and it's a lot harder to traverse. Or because as cool as swinging is for Spider-Man is, I don't want to literally go from South New York to North New York just because swinging is awesome. I'm not going to spend 10 minutes of my life
Yeah.
literally swinging. That's a little bit too much. So, like, in that case, like, fast travel is just very necessary.
Yeah. And using fast travel correctly is also kind of can be an issue. Like, because I have this issue with like Cyberpunk where, as I'm playing through the game, I always forget like where my apartment is and stuff like that in the game, and so
Mhm.
I want to like fast travel to the location where it's at, but I have to go to the specific terminal, and since that game has so much verticality with the freaking freeways and stuff like that system set up,
Mhm.
I'll put the map marker on there to help me follow it to it, and I'll be following it, and it's like, all right, you're here, and I'm like, wait, where is it? And then that game has fall damage, so like I see that it's like down there on the bottom of the freeway. I was like, oh well, I just can't jump because then I'll die. And so I was like, so I had to waste like an extra 5 minutes going around, getting down there, and then getting to the terminal, and that way I could just fast travel to it. And that, I mean, maybe there's a implement a system where you could just kind of click and do it, but I haven't found it yet, or maybe I just haven't gotten that far into the game. But having to do it that way is where like fast travel can really be a burden. Where it's like, oh, like I want to go here so I could go do this real quick, but now I got to go to this thing, and when I get to that thing, I got to do it this way. And I think it just happens with the sandbox games when they're so big that you have that issue pop up, and it's like, all right, here we go. I got to waste my time right here. Let's do this.
And you know what? I actually kind of that actually brought up some new problems with it, is because I hate when you can't fast travel, when it's like, oh, you're in this area, or oh, technically you're in a fight, so you can't fast travel, and you're
There's
like,
enemies
no,
around.
I don't want to fight these people. I just want to keep going. Just let me travel to where I need to go. Like, I shouldn't have to, like, I mean, see if I can go there. Hopefully they can't catch up to me. Let's go into this area, and hopefully I don't run into something else, or the game to bless me with the get out of, this area free card. And
Yeah,
and like you said, the other one is like, oh, like there is some places that you have to just go to, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna put you a little bit off that place, and you have to like truck it the rest of the way. And it's like, but did it have to be like a minute? Like, I just, because, like, yeah, games like Cyberpunk, you can't remember where things are. Like, the
yeah,
world in Cyberpunk is actually so big where it's like you will get lost. You don't, like, trying to figure out like where the districts are and all that kind of jazz. It's like it's not worth it. It's not, your memory or your mind is not going to keep any of that in memory. It's just like, oh, look at the pretty building, look at pretty cars. Like, everything else is already distracting you enough as it is. So yeah, like when you need stuff like, look, if I have to keep going to this bar, just make me go to the bar. Like, obviously this bar is very important. Just let me fast travel to the bar. Don't make me go down the street and have to cross 3 blocks to get
yeah.
to the bar. Like, you're wasting my time.
It's that, and oh man, I had another one, and I think I just forgot it. No, it was a good one too, but it's oh, what is it? What is it? Like a better option mainly for like to just go to the map much easily. Like a lot of the, so I have problems with sandbox games where you want to check the map where you're at in it, and you have to go into the menu, then click on the map, and then it goes to where you're at, and it's like, oh, like this is so, this takes too much time for me to do that, because what I want to do is like, okay, I'm kind of lost, and I don't have to go this way, so I just want to hit a button, open the map, and I go, okay, I can see where I need to go here, and I could go to it, but instead I gotta open up the menu, go to the map option, and then go to it, and it's like those little small steps. I get why they do it, but at the same time, it's like it becomes really hard for me, and I guess my attention span maybe for playing was just like, all right, cool. I just lost like an extra few seconds, 10 seconds, which I know it's very something to complain about, but there's so many other games out there where you just press a button, the map opens up, and it's like, oh, thank God, this is great.
And actually Hogwarts Legacy does that too, where like the middle PlayStation button, not like the circle one, but like that touchpad that they have on the
Yeah,
controllers. if you touch that, it brings them. You go straight to the map automatically. And
That's
then like the
nice.
start button will just bring like the overall menu stuff. So like that, those are times where I kind of really like that. Cause a lot of times you're just trying to figure out like, okay, am I going the right way? Am I
Yeah.
even in the right area? Cause like Pokemon's kind of like that too, where you're like, you not like it tells you that you kind of shifted over, but sometimes like the Pokemon's in like a particular grass area that you have to be in, and then you're like, you just kind of shied from that path a little bit. So you're like, oh, I was in the wrong space the entire time for 30 minutes. You know,
Yeah.
like that's why I haven't seen this stupid thing. I want to say I hate that, but it is annoying. Like there are just some things where it's like it's a little annoying to keep doing that. It's a little annoying. I got to figure out, those kind of things. Like I said, I just want to go to the spot. Like it's
Yeah.
hard. Like they don't do that enough in. I just feel like I don't know why it's not universal in sandbox games. If we're all copying the same thing, why is this the part of the homework that we had to change?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
especially because like everybody wants to make their sandbox bigger, more versatile, whether it's vertically or a wider map and stuff like that. So if you're gonna make your map gigantic, I'm cool. I'm all for it. Let's do this, but make it an easier option to just look up the map. That way, I can know where I'm going and stuff like that. It's those little details that make it so much easier.
yeah, and you know what? Mini maps are very important. Like when it comes to games like that, and I think also I kind of want to talk about mini maps by itself because sometimes that could be like the bane of my existence too. Is when mini maps are just not used correctly, or you can't work with a mini map to like best help you
Oh
because
yeah,
if it's a game that has a lot of icons in the mini map, they overlap a lot. And and sometimes you just want to hit a button that just makes it like a little bit bigger, just kind of give you like a little zoom in, zoom out. And we're just talking about this small mini map on the side, not even trying to get the whole map out. Just like I need to make sure I'm in the right area, or is this area upstairs or downstairs? The worst
right.
part is like when it's like, oh, where is this guy? I don't know where he's at. I'm at the right spot, and then you realize there's like a little small triangle, like right there, facing upward, and you're like, "Are there stairs? What the?
What's
I
going on?
completely missed the stairs." And it's like you're thinking that you're in the right spot, and it's like, "Well, why am I not finding it?" Or like, "Oh, it's actually underground, but you can't go to underground here and stuff." And it doesn't have like a just tell me where to go game button. And so
Yeah,
you're all like, well, I'm standing on top of it, and there's like underground. Where is underground? How far do I have to go back? It's just it's little things like that. It's annoying, and it's like sometimes it does kill the experience and stuff. But I know some games just have different opinions on it. But it's like another one of those things where it's like we all copy the same homework. Some things could be the same. Like there's sometimes it's
mm,
just a yes to an answer, and there's sometimes there's a no to an answer. This was the yes. Why did you change this? You don't need
yeah.
to give it the maybe. Like we got to give it some more context. Like no, just do it.
That's one thing where I would actually give praise to Cyberpunk is when you have your map options stuff like that, and you have your mini map. When you open the settings, you could actually customize what icons you want to appear on the map, which
Mhm.
is a really nice thing to have because like since there's so much to do in that game and there's so much around, it's like all right, I need to go here, but I need this specific thing, which it helped me out to find like the terminal to fast travel. It's like I need to find the terminal, so I literally got to the customization spot and went to the terminals and everything. I was like, cool, I just want this to show up on the map, and it popped up, and that was the only thing on the map. She's like, that's awesome. It's like because I'm having troubles with the verticality of this game to find it, so at least that way I know that's the only icon I gotta worry about right now on my mini map now. And that, it like makes so much of a difference.
Yeah, think about it. In 2023, you still have to deal with some people not putting filters in maps,
Yeah.
or like they didn't filter out. Like I just want to see these granular icons. I think that what makes me mad the most is when they don't granulate the icons. Where it's like, okay, I want important missions. This very particular, like where these hidden items are, and then this, and then shut off everything else. Sometimes it'll be like, oh well, we have to turn off these groups, or we got to turn off these groups. Like I don't want to do that. Just make a list. And I say this for everything. Like filter lists just need to be more granular in a lot of stuff because filter lists is like it just seems like again this needs to happen. Like they like just make it easy. It's literally strings in code. Like you just like I don't want to get into that, but it's just a lot of the. It's just like it's not that much effort. I'm not gonna have anybody argue that. Like, no, it's not that much effort. Just do it. It's like it hurts when you can't, especially like games like Horizon, like Zero Dawn or Horizon, Forbidden West. There are so many icons from the enemy types to the nest to the collectibles to what you could do in the towns for everything. It's just looks damaging to the eye, and then even trying to like go into the filter and be like, okay, I got to do this right. I got to make sure this turns off this, but I need to see this, and you're just really like, like, man, I got to go make my own custom map here to kind of get all this
Yeah.
stuff done. It's like it's a lot, but I rather have too many filters than too little. Like I don't need like, oh well, you can't see the monster list and the like the actual the quest list. Like if you turn off one, you have to turn off both. Like no, don't do that. I don't want that. That's dumb. It's like I should have one or the other or both or none. Like it is, those are the only options.
Yeah, for sure. Um, what was it? I had that issue with The Witcher. I think that's why originally when I was playing The Witcher, but this was years ago and stuff like that. I don't know if they've updated it by now, but I had that issue where I just couldn't get the exact icons I needed and stuff like that. So I would get overwhelmed by just my mini map because it would just have everything on it. I'd be like, oh no, I'm like I don't know what this is or what exactly this icon is because they're not distinguished enough for me to tell a difference in the mini map. And so that it drew me off from just kind of going, all right, well, whatever, I'm gonna give up on that quest, or I'm gonna give up on going to that little shop. Like, I'll find it later.
So we kind of went into like a lot of few different things about sandbox, and there's a lot more to probably go into little by little. But like when it comes to like it ruining like single player games, like do you feel like it is? Do you feel like it's actually helping it, or do you kind of feel like, well, this is kind of like this is what I expect out of a single player game?
I think at where we're at in 2023, I think it's starting to. For me, it was like a downward curve where I thought it was kind of ruining games for a while, because everybody wanted a big open sandbox game, and the bigger, the better, and everything like that. And that was getting too overwhelming for me. And now you're starting to see this shift where it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have this like open world sandbox like game,
Hmm.
but it's gonna be a little bit more linear, where you have like the God of War games are a perfect example of that, where it's like I think especially the second one, from I haven't played it, from what I heard, it's like you have the open area stuff like that, but it's a little bit more linear, but you still have that openness to it. And it's like that's a lot nicer for me personally because like it will keep me playing the game and stuff like that. Whereas when
Yeah.
it's just a big open vast world and stuff like that, and you keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger, it would get overwhelming. And that's where it seemed like, especially during like the end of the PS3 into heading to PS4, Xbox One era stuff like that. That's where all the games were seemed like they were going in that because of GTA just knocking it out of the park, and Bethesda with their RPGs in Skyrim and stuff like that, kind of using that aspects of that, but putting the RPG elements. That's where you saw everything going, and I was like, man, like if that's where like the big AAA single player games are going for me, like I'm not gonna play a lot of them, and I didn't. I really didn't because I was just like I would just get overwhelmed, and so I would find the smaller, more linear games and stuff for me. But I think it's starting to head up to an upward trajectory. I'm really interested to see what happens after Starfield comes out and see what that does for the industry and the idea of how these big games are going to be made going forward. What about yourself?
I feel that single player narratives are starting to be on the rise because of that. Personally, for me, I feel like the good thing about sandbox games is value wise they offer a lot. They offer replay value for single player games. They offer just a little bit more breadth and a lot of stuff while also having the depth to go into some stuff,
Hmm.
and they're really like a perfect the mechanic of saying like, you know what, this could be multiplayer if we just added a few things, right? You could be like if Sunset Overdrive had you like fighting other people for some reason, like the kind of like the world's already kind of set up if you want to like make it like battle royale style and kind of have stuff like encroach and stuff. But and this is probably because of like the games that I started playing like back in November or like December kind of going on, is that like I had immensely enjoyed a lot of single player, single minded, linear A to B stuff because I guess I enjoyed a lot of the stuff of like it's probably simplicity. It's just the fact that I enjoyed some of the narratives had to be a little bit more important. In some cases, like a lot of like the voice acting and stuff tend I want to say tend to be better, but it tend to be more prevalent. And it's like it takes games like kind of like Hogwarts Legacy. It takes games like kind of like the later Assassin's Creed, like Valhalla and stuff, where it's like, okay, we added a few things to where the world look a little bit more alive and stuff for the sandbox games to really do well and stuff. But a lot of times, like you could definitely tell, like in some cases, like with some people, they're not really trying to put too much effort, and so they give them like a line or whatever. And I feel like when it comes to sandbox games, there's a lot more plot holes that it's hard to cover them all
Yeah,
because a lot of people they say about for Forspoken, kind of like other sandbox games, is when they don't feel like they're alive enough. They don't when they feel like it's very empty and you feel like you can't do anything. But sometimes in a single player game, it's like you're kind of a lot of times playing through a story when you're doing it the linear way. And cases like Hi-Fi Rush, like you're continuously moving to something, beating something up, and kind of going on. You're always kind of just turning the wheel, but this wheel has a lot of times where it's trying to change your attention up to kind of pay attention to this, get involved in that, do a lot of other kind of jazz, and it even has like after gameplay kind of things that you can go back and do. Albeit I didn't touch them, like I already beat the game, I'm not going back. But that's kind of
right.
like what I do, but it was still fun to kind of see the characters and kind of get really used to them. And then you play it for like a week and you're done. Like it's just one of those things where like you got your experience out of it. Like you don't need like a movie to be 5 hours to feel like you really got your money's worth. It just needs to do what it needs to do well in an hour and 30 minutes. Like it's just one of those things where it's like it just needs to be done correctly. And sometimes sandbox games, while they do offer a lot, sometimes they can get pretty spread out to where like more issues kind of creep up than most.
Yeah, I agree with you in those aspects. I think for a long time what was I was really seeing and stuff like that when I would see comments and stuff like that, people talking about video games, they'd be like, oh, like these linear games like Hi-Fi Rush, or even like certain things like God of War. If you kind of made that game come out back, let's say 6 to 10 years ago and stuff like that, a lot of people would be like, well, it was only like 20 hours, so is that worth $60 or etc. And it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, you know what I mean. Like that was kind of the narrative that was going around a lot of times. Like, oh, this isn't worth my money. Like it was only 20 hours long, or it was only 15 hours long, and this and that. It's like, and it's nice to see that narrative change and stuff for these single player games, because of this open world sandbox games were kind of hitting their huge strides, and everyone was like, I want the biggest, the baddest game, almost open world game ever. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, whoa, let's pump the brakes, guys. Like, one, that costs a lot of money to do over and over again, and two, like, you're kind of losing the narrative of storytelling when it comes to these games, because you're just kind of doing whatever at some point. And so it's nice to see that a lot of these games are starting to kind of turn around in that aspect. And I think this is a question I could kind of ask you, since I haven't had a chance to play the games. Like, what do you feel about the Horizon games going forward? Because I know they're a lot more of a sandbox game openness compared to like the God of War and stuff like that. But do you feel they did a better job of kind of condensing it story wise to be able to kind of get you where you want in those marks?
So story wise, there's no condensing. Like it, Horizon Zero Dawn, at least in my opinion, is a very large game. It's kind of like how God of War is like a long time to kind of finish everything. Horizon Zero Dawn is really hard for me to call it a sandbox game because the area that you have to traverse is very large. And a lot of the places that you visit too are also very large. While you don't have to do a lot of them and a lot of them are touch points, like actually trying to do stuff, you have to travel a lot. There's a lot of stuff that you have to get into. And the story does a good job of kind of pushing you stuff in there. Albeit though, if you want to be able to kind of get your full breadth of it, you have to like explore. You have to go Breath of the Wild style, go to different areas. Hopefully something cool will pop up and stuff. But because a lot of the side quests are very narrative driven and stuff like that, it makes it a little bit more worth it. At least personally for me. I know for some other people they'll probably go hit X or whatever. But there, it's hard to really kind of, let's say, go to every area when the game is not going to take you everywhere. Like if I just didn't do any side quests, like the map traversing would definitely be very different than what I actually did. Because
Okay.
sometimes like you don't have to go to like a very particular beach. You don't have to go to like this very particular desert or something. Because the story isn't really trying to take you in those directions and stuff. Like the whole idea is you're this person that's kind of going around, you don't know where you're going. It's the first time you've ever been in this area. And so you end up helping people because your status has gone across the lands and people who came from your hometown. Hey, you're the girl. Hey, I need you to do something real quick. It's like
Yeah.
it's kind of like how Horizon kind of works. And so in that aspect, like I don't mind it, even though it can be very taxing because if the side quests are also too long, they just like, okay, like I had to go to like 10 different places to complete this one side quest. And I don't even know what I got at the end. Right.
Right.
It's like it's one of those things where it's like when the reward doesn't match the effort, then I think that's where like Horizon kind of really falls. Horizon has different issues. Like a lot of like the optimization and stuff in the game was probably more of an issue than what you had to do. Like you're a girl who has a crossbow and has some hacky attacks. Like that's kind of what you do. Like you're not there to really do a lot of hack and slash. And if you did, like the monsters are gonna like mess you up. Like it's just no way around it. Then so like you already have like a core mechanic that you have to play around and it works out really good, honestly. But
Yeah.
like it was, I think what I hate about the game was like when your hair was going different directions because it looked like it was a rag body on your head.
Gotcha.
And there's sometimes when you're clipping and stuff like that. Like I think the only thing that bothered me the most because the game looked in and in itself really beautiful when we're talking about like just console. Like if it was probably on PC, it probably would be like a few steps up. But just on console, on OLED TVs, the game looks really good. And so I liked it for that. But I understand why, even though it was probably in game of the year, kind of the trope around it, I understand why it couldn't win. And it's because it is more
Okay.
sandbox in that aspect of like there isn't like a really nice narrative story really driven you. Like a lot of times like you have to deal with the main characters like bad quirks and stuff like that. And sometimes the more side quests that you kind of get into, the more you're kind of revealed to like, oh, do I really like this person or not? Like it's easier for like to be like a punk or whatever, and you hated the world from the very beginning, and you're just kind of dealing with stuff because that's how people dealt with you. So it's a little bit easier to kind of see someone dealing with this thing, but it's harder when someone's like single-minded and they have to like do this other stuff. But it's like, oh yeah, but you have time. Just come on, help us out, and you just have the girl like, it's like there's nothing really kind of developing there. And so, like when you're doing the main story, it doesn't have the same narrative feel as God of War because God of War was trying to tell a very particular story. Like at
Right.
the end of the day, there was a point to it all, and everything else was just sized to that point until it really landed at the end. And I think God of War 1 did a really good job of making sure the relationship between these two characters worked. Same thing with Requiem of Darkness or Requiem of the Plague or something like that. Plague Tale
Yeah.
Requiem. There we go.
Got it.
Is like it was all about the girl and the boy, and the whole point was like, could this girl need to do what she needed to do, and how much was she willing to struggle to do it? And the game takes you through the struggle. That's the point of the game. It's a little bit easier to feel for her. It's a little bit easier to resent her because you have a reason to. It's really hard for Aloy to see if you hate her or not because a lot of times it just seems like you're just kind of in the situation and for some reason, you, the girl, even though you have something that helps out, are able to deal more with a lot of this stuff than other people. Like you already feel kind of disconnected to the world you're already trying to help. Versus in other
Gotcha.
things, it's like you kind of fit in as well as you need to be. And that was a tangent, a little bit going on from there. But I think that's kind of why I want to ask this question about sandbox games because it would. This is probably one of the most effort game sandbox you killed. If you want to call them a sandbox game, Horizon Zero Dawn was one of the most high effort ones you could have done. right? Because it has a lot of different enemy types. You could even control some of the enemy types. You get a lot of different types of weapons that you can use that deal with a lot of types of situations. You have a very particular combat that you're kind of forced in. But once you're in it, you're like, yeah, I'm in it. I got bullets and stuff, and then you're trying to find out different loadouts and builds in order to handle the different situations. It has a lot of the stuff that we were talking about at the beginning that makes it a great game, but it can't win every category. And I think when
Right.
you play a sandbox game, it has to do so many things and ends up being a jack of all trades. Can do everything, but master at none of them. And it's really hard for like you to be like, oh, did I remember and was I invested into this game the same way I am with these more linear titles? Which um, Final Fantasy 13, what was the biggest problem with that game? Was everybody said at the time, this game is too
Too
linear
linear.
compared to like everything else. But when you take a second pass at it, that wasn't the problem. The problem was that it wasn't a linear game. The problem was like literally the levels could have just been a hallway, but they just put
Yeah.
rocks in it, so you had to do this. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't that it was linear from a lot of other stuff, because a lot of the story stuff kind of worked out like it needed to. It was the
Mm-hmm.
problem of like it was empty, it was dead, it wasn't catching your attention, and so it doesn't work well when an RPG when like all your bosses or all your enemies are like, oh, if I touch them, now we're in this particular spot, beat it, okay, run, hit another enemy, particular
Yeah.
spot. When that's on repeat, that sucks. But games like Hi-Fi Rush, where like the battle and the combat is fun, you got the music going with it. You're trying to do stuff in a particular way. You're actually getting to the groove of what the game wants you to do. You tend to kind of forget the repetitiveness of it, and you're just like, oh yeah, but look at this guys using these cool powers. I'm having my friends jump in and doing all this crazy stuff. All the characters' quirkiness are coming out because they invested in the single character rather than 20 of them.
Yeah.
It's like that's kind of how it works. So that's kind of
um,
why I went to end on that one. That was my point.
I think like as you were talking about it, kind of dawned on me like the I'm not gonna say perfect, but one of the best things that anyone I think going forward can learn from when it comes to sandbox games is Breath of the Wild, The Legend of Zelda. That is the one game where the way it was designed, the way like everything works, like you have your main missions, and that's what you go out to do, right? Out of those main missions, you have other side quests stuff that you can do, and what they do with all of those is like they make them different types of fun puzzles to do, to give you better options for new items, upgrading stuff, and at the same time you had the I'm a big fan of it. I know it's kind of been a talked about issue now more now than it was when the time when the game came out. But your weapons breaking, I think, was one of the coolest things that was part of the game because that forced you to have to play the game different when you got to certain points because your your sword that you had before you got your master sword would start to run out and break, and you would have to kill one of the goblins and steal their club and learn how to fight with that club, or you couldn't get a club, so you had to get the bow and arrow, and so you had to learn how to defeat these enemies with the bow and arrow and stuff like that. It made you have to learn how to play the game differently and move on through it, but at the same time, like those were all optional things that you could just skip and just beeline it and do the game that way. But if you didn't do it, you got rewarded very well for getting more hearts, getting better upgrades for your items, stuff like that, getting better weapons and stuff like that that you could save for. I know I have a boss fight in this area, so I'm gonna save these better weapons for this part of it and stuff like that. And like the use of like the having to put your clothes on and stuff like that to, or like cooking and stuff like that for the food to this, you want to survive a cold area but you don't have the right attire, you could cook certain foods that would keep you hot so you could kind of traverse through that area for a little bit. It was all those little details where it's like I'm going to add this game mechanic of the cooking, but the reason why I'm putting the cooking is not just to heal you, it's to also help you with this and that. And once you start realizing all this stuff, you're like, holy crud, this is like really really smart. And this sandbox just lets you kind of do whatever you want, but they really did do the thing where like these items work together and this is why they work together and this is how you see where it works together. And that's where like I could see, I hope a lot of games going forward when it comes to sandbox learn from that and go like, okay, I get what they're doing here and this is why all of this works well together.
This is one of those things where like for most of it I kind of disagree. Because a lot of those mechanics I actually hate when it comes to like sandbox, even in RPGs. But I think the part that you're saying where it's like as long as they're smartly integrated, the risk versus reward is there, blah blah blah, and it's something that makes sense for the character to do. I think that last one is very important. Then those things kind of work for me. Like I always hated weapon breaking because it's like the game was trying to stop you from doing something, and like you're like, okay, well, now I gotta go fix my armor and blah blah blah. Like I hate that. Like I hate that. It's like I have to go through that. Like I don't need that much realism in a game. It's like it's weird to kind of have it in there, stuff the case. But I understand if there's like something that kind of comes from it. Like, there's something that you want to do, there's something you can do regularly. Like I get it, like when you're talking about like particular game mechanics, like if Cyberpunk has something like that because you overheated the gun too much or whatever, or you actually got cyber psychosis because you kept using the cyber ability stuff. Like those kind of penalties I could probably cope with a little bit better. But I always hated when it was just kind of like, oh, I had to go buy a whole new sword because I used this one made too many times. So like I was kind of those were always kind of weird for me. But like cooking, I can never get around it. Like I cooking is a lot of times nothing but a benefit because it for RPGs it's stats benefits. For games like you said, if you had to get to a particular area and you need to do something to help you traverse it better, they could have used it for that. That is smart integration. Outside of that, though, I feel like it's just another mechanic I don't want to or need to use. And maybe some games probably a little bit harder for me because I could have just easily beat it better or got more XP if I just did like certain things. But I feel like that's too much research I want to do for a game that I'm going to put down when it's finished. It's different from gotcha games where it's like I gotta be efficient as possible. So I need to learn like the ups and downs and the stats. But when it comes to like other games where it's all like, oh, you gotta go find ingredients, you gotta go harvest this, then you gotta get the recipes, then you gotta go do like it's like I just don't like this. You're taking me away from the
That's
game a little bit.
that
And
was
like,
kind of like the fun part of Breath of the Wild is that, like, especially when it came to the cooking aspect of it, like, it was never
mhm.
like a, I have to find all this stuff. It's just like you had what you had, and you would kind of just cook it together and see, like, all right, let's see what happens, and it would prompt you onto it to let you know if you're cooking something bad or good. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And then once you figured out the recipe and stuff like that, it would just save it into your inventory. And so when you had the items for it, you'd be like, oh, cool, I can make this. Oh, cool, I can make that. But they made it a really smart way to where you didn't have to rely on it for everything. It was just an added bonus option to help you use it in the game if you
hmm
wanted it. And I think that's where like that mechanic did they did a really good job with that mechanic because it wasn't like a, okay, you have to do this, you have to know these recipes. It's just like a, you can also do this as well, but it's not going to impact
yeah,
you badly if you don't.
yeah. So like objectively, I don't think that mechanic should go away. Like objectively, I feel like it is something that's added. You can do a lot more with it, and you could probably be very smart with it. Subjectively, like, or at least in my single-minded part, I
Yeah,
normally I like it. It kind of reminds me of the other side quest. I'm talking about you have to go do it in order to get
yeah,
this. Instead of like if they just had a level system and you just leveled up and got it like that, I feel like that's a little bit easier to do. Like in some cases. Now, I know a lot of like games like sandboxes don't really do leveling anymore because it's like it's really about the skill. You just want to check your skill at the door. And I think I'm always gonna, hooray for that. Yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like some of this stuff could have just easily just came to me instead of me having to stop the game to deal with it. Like kind of stuff like that. So that's the only thing that is like it's hard for like games that are side quests, but they're not really side quests. They're just like other things you can do, but it's like, oh, they'll help out, but you have to spend time to do it. And I think that's
no, yeah,
kind of where like some games stop being fun for me personally. Even in the gotcha game that I'm playing right now, Epic 7, I hate and love the pet system. Like I hate it because it takes a lot of investment to make pets worth it. I like it because it gives you some free rewards once it's done. But if like let's say like, oh well, your pets are level 4, now we're gonna make them level 5 to get them to level 5, it's almost as much effort to get them from 1 star to 4 star. Like it's
gotcha.
always triple to quadruple the amount of work it takes to get them to the next step. And I absolutely hate it. It's like any updates that they have after this, I'm like, nope, I'm not dealing with it. I already hate the fact that the pets control like how many times like I could repeat something. Like I just don't want to like spend so much time and resources to do this thing, or like this is a small benefit in time when I could just be doing something else with it. That I think that's where I really kind of where the mechanic itself really just upsets me.
No, yeah, I'm with you because like with the Cult of the Lamb, I hate having like I get why you have to cook in the game and stuff like that 'cause you have to feed your followers and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
at the same time, like they add so many like dumb little things where it's like, oh well, if you cook this and cook that, like it will make your followers throw up or it'll do this and stuff like that. And I get all of that, but like there's one thing they did do that was kind of smart is like they gave you certain things that you could end up finding and upgrading your character,
Hmm.
like your cult leader and stuff like that, to like kind of break those things off. Like one of them is like you would make like one of the easiest things to make is like a grass mule and stuff like that. And so
Hmm.
like it's like the cooking aspect is a really easy part of it. It's just like when they would eat this grass meal, it would like what's it called? It would upset their stomach and stuff like that, right? And it could get them sick. And so you end up finding out that you can unlock a perk where your followers now can eat it and they don't get sick anymore. And I was like, thank God, because I'm not gonna go trying to get all the berries and pumpkins and cauliflower seeds and having to farm them and then having to get the right amount of them so I could cook because I have to have 12 followers that I have to feed and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And then at the
I don't
same
know why
time,
that
you have
sounds
a
funny.
and at the same time, you have like a ritual where you could like have like a feast for everyone to feed them, but that also has a cooldown too. So you have to like you can only use it at a certain time. Like it was those things that were really, really annoying. So like when I was able to find the other perks to like kind of benefit all that, I was like, cool. I don't have to really worry so much about trying to find all these seeds anymore. Now I just have them there. If worst case comes scenario, I could just make them the grass meals and they'll all be happy. Cool. Thank God, because the other parts of it, like it, especially towards the beginning of the game, it kind of gets annoying. You're like, oh, dude, come on, like. I really have to go find these pumpkin seeds because if I feed them this grass one, they're gonna vomit and they're gonna die and I have to deal with all that. It's like,
Yeah.
come on, guys. So
Yeah.
yeah, I get where it could be annoying.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of why, like, I see it in that lens. It's just like when it's like a ton of effort, like you just have to really. And sometimes I think the one reason why I hate the cooking mechanic is because I'll forget to do it. Like when they're
Hmm.
like they had the effects are timed, like you'll
Yeah,
be like, okay, before I go into this, this level per se, I'll eat something. And sometimes I'm just like, I'll just cook whatever. Like plus attack, sure. Plus defense, sure. Like, and I'll just do it because it's like it's better to have the perk than not. But then like
yeah,
I'll forget like if it expired, I'll forget like if it's doing something. And then sometimes you don't know what's coming on, and so you might be like in a lot of cutscenes all of a sudden, or doing a lot of story stuff, so you're not really fighting to like really use the perk. And then like by the time you actually really need it, like it died a long time ago, but you didn't really
yeah,
know because it's like you're not really paying attention to it. It's like, oh, like because some of them are like, oh, you can only cook when you're in a special area. You can only cook when you're camping. Don't you know that? If you're not camping, you can't cook. That's just how it works. Like if
yeah,
not, you have to go buy a meal. And I think Pokemon was doing that too. I forgot. But it was just one of those things where it's like, okay, like you can only do it particular times. They only last for a little bit. There's never a good time to use it unless you're going to be grindy. I'm like, oh, I'm just here to grind levels. So it's
yeah,
like, hey, after a while, you just kind of forget it. Like that's why it's like I always kind of hate those mechanics. And I guess in like single player linear games, you don't have just mechanics like that where you have to do them. It's like, yeah, you don't got time for that. We know where the boss is. We got to go beat him up.
yeah,
So those are one of my things. I want to hit on sandbox again because I think it's something that I notice of where my gaming trajectory kind of slowed down is a lot of my favorite games are sandboxy to open world. And some of the games that we kind of explained, like Breath of the Wild and probably even Horizon Zero Dawn, are more open world where there's not really like a load screen in between these different areas. Like
yeah,
you can literally go outside and then into another building without really any delay. But I just noticed that like the more these are, the more that they're trying to like pad these games, like the more it's harder to really complete them. Like I said, like I'm still playing Hogwarts Legacy, but like I should have been kind of already done with the game. I'm kind of glad it's giving me content, like because a lot of the times it's really side quests that are actually extending the game. And a
yeah,
lot of the quests they don't really tell you that they're available. Sometimes you just have to look at the map and notice the icons. So if you don't, you might miss it, But there are a lot of games now, especially if they're tied to live services, where it's just kind of like they try to give you a lot of stuff so you could do something before they actually start delivering you stuff, or you start getting the right DLC, or you start getting stuff later on. And I feel like a lot of the sandbox games are kind of going to that model. And
Yeah.
I think I'm appreciating the return to simplicity, the return to like, I'm just trying to play this game. I'm trying to do whatever I can, like I'm enjoying the stuff that is feeding me. There's a steak, there's mashed potatoes, add some grains. There you go. Like I don't really need to go to a buffet anymore at this point.
Yeah. You wanna go deep into the woods, stuff like that. Use that for survival games. That's why they're kind of a thing now, and that's why they've become popular. Because yeah, people enjoy that stuff and use them for the survival games. Don't use them for your open box sandbox games. Like it makes so much of a difference.
Could a horror sandbox game work? A game that's like 24/7 jump scare? It's like,
I mean, that's kind of how like Silent Hill was, right? Like Silent Hill 2, you kind of just go through the town of Silent Hill, walk around in it and stuff like that.
pretty much. I think Silent Hill kind of counts in that aspect. I guess I just didn't really. Well, because you're not really doing a lot. You have to traverse, or you have to. It's more Metrovania because you always have to go back to the place that you've always been to, or you always have
That's a
to
good point.
like traverse stuff you've already done because like you might have gotten like a new thing to unlock another thing. Versus like in a sandbox game or like open world, sometimes they'll block you from going to an area because like
That's true. You would get blocked. Yeah.
yeah. It's like you don't have the glide ability. Like you better go back. Silent Hill is just like you could be hitting a lot of walls until like you finally found the one that has a door. Like
That's true.
and then you have to go back and say, oh, where I think one of those other walls opened up. I think I heard like ding somewhere. Somewhere. I must find it.
Yeah, true that. True. That'd be interesting. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to see someone make it, but if they did, it'd be interesting to try it out.
Yeah. But I think we can kind of end it on there. Like again, like when it comes to breaking down like mechanics, like especially like sandbox mechanics stuff, there are a lot, and I think it's like we're pretty fun to talk about, pretty fun to go into it. But I just noticed if studios are going to try and bring single player games back, which I hope they do, I do feel like there's just some things that they have to be willing to let go, and some things that are like this is a bare minimum. Like that's kind of where I'm at. Like I need you. There's a lot in the middle you could play with, but everything that needs to have the foundation needs to be here, and all this fluff, get rid of it. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna do it. I'm not much of a completionist, and if you make it too much work to be a completionist, I'm not gonna do it. Forspoken, I'm probably 20% done with that game. I am not gonna do the other 80%. It's just not gonna happen. I don't care. I was able to do everything with the minimum that I had, and that's kind of where my fun was. That's I don't want to do it.
Right.
It sounds whiny a little bit, but the games are now becoming $70. I think even Breath of the Wild or the Tears of the whatever is
Yeah.
$70 for a Switch game. To me,
Yeah.
that is criminal. Nintendo games cannot be more than $60. They shouldn't even be $60 for all I care. But some of them need to be, a little bit cheaper. But Nintendo's normally the king of single player in a lot of that aspects. So it's like, hate when they kind of do it well. And you at this point now they're asking for receipts. So it's
Well,
just one of those things.
now they know they can't. They're like, we could charge 70, and people aren't complaining, but they're still gonna buy it. You're like,
Yeah. Nintendo
You're
has
right.
had great gross margins because it's like the console's cheap, everybody can get it. When you buy one, like I saw an OLED Switch for $160. Like, and I was just like,
Where'd
really,
you see
just
that?
a white OLED Switch? It was just on Facebook Marketplace, just
Dang.
selling a Switch, and I was like, God, like this stuff has really changed. Like, it's like, but it's they're more expensive in other cases. But the fact is, like, you can still find them cheaper. Try to find a PS5, on sale, even with everything kind of slowing down. You're still gonna pay
Yeah.
like 450, 400 for some money, and it's a fair price compared to what it is. But they're just a lot harder to come by when you can get the regular Switch and the OLED Switch, and you still play the same games. Then like I just like Nintendo's gross margins, they have to be high.
I'm just gonna say if you see that OLED Switch for that price again, let me know. let me know. I might buy it. That's just the tech nerd in me wanting to get the OLED screen. I know
Yeah,
it.
no, I saw it. But it was like the first like white one. Like for me, it's like when I kind of upgrade consoles, it's like it has to be like the special editions. Like
Okay.
the Scarlet and Violet one. I probably
Yeah.
would have got that if it didn't was like, but they didn't do enough to really change the console. And then you could tell because they only added $50 to the price tag. It's all like it has OLED screen, no change in battery. Give me money, you know. Versus like
Uh,
a Steam Deck is like I actually got a lot for how much it costs, and I've been playing it ever since I got it.
nice.
With that being said, everybody, thank you for watching today. If you didn't have a chance to kind of catch us, don't worry, we'll be here next Friday. Actually, next Friday we'll have an episode, but it will be remote if I remember correctly, right? That will be
Yes.
remote, and yeah, remote next, live next, and then we'll have another remote. So in March we will have 2 remotes. I will actually be at the game developers conference the week of that. So if you are going, if you happen to go, come see me, and I'll be just kind of be walking around doing what I do. But for now, like that's kind of our schedule. We have 2 that have records, but we'll make sure that you have something every Friday to come and enjoy. Give us your comments, give us your feedbacks and opinions. But like everything, hit the like button, share this video with everybody else, and we will see you next time when I can find the end broadcast button.
You can do it.